Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's session. The session today that I'm going to be delivering is for TABE recertification. If you've been to an implementation training and it's been 5 years, then this session will serve for that purpose. So it's for existing staff who have already attended an implementation training at some point in their adult ed years with the field. So in order for the supplemental service grant to track everyone who has attended today's session, I'm going to ask you to put your first and last name in the chat, as well as the agency that you're currently working with, and then your work email address, because as part of the purpose of the grant, we need to track how many folks attend these trainings, either whether they're implementation or their recertification. So if you could do that at this time. And if you're just coming into the session, please type your first and last name, the agency that you are working with, and your work email address in the chat so that the training group with the supplemental service grant can track how many individuals were at today's training for recertification. Thank you. All right. So as part of today's session, there's a lot of links that are included in the slide deck, as well as the materials from the session. There's two different documents that are in the participant folder, which we will chat out at the end of today's training. But the first two links that are in here are the slide deck and the materials. And then the second links that are in here are from a coffee break that was held in May of what do we know about TABE 13 and 14. And then there's a materials link that also goes with that coffee break from May. So at this time, I'm going to introduce myself. My name, gosh, it's been a long day already. Sorry. My name is Linda Keller. I have been in adult ed for 30 years now. I've been in a support staff role. I am not a licensed teacher, but since I've been working in adult ed, I've worked with the same program. The program is called Metro North Adult Basic Education. The role that I work with Metro North is accountability coordinator. So it's all things data, testing, data collection, reporting, GED manager access, and so forth. I have done new student enrollment for both ABE and ESL. And then I also serve on the supplemental service provider for test training, and I deliver both CASAS and TABE trainings here in Minnesota since about 2008. For those of you who don't know much about Metro North is 8 school districts, 12 sites in the northern part of the Minneapolis area. We have sites located within 3 corrections locations, as well as Anoka Ramsey Community College, Anoka Technical College. We have sites out in suburban area. We have sites on Elk River. We have sites in St. Francis, Centennial, Columbia Heights, Fridley, Blaine, and Spring Lake Park and Fridley. So now that you know a little bit about me, I'd like you to tell me some information about who's in the group today. And I'm going to turn my camera off just to save on bandwidth. But I always like to know who I'm speaking with or who the group is that's in the session. So if you could put in how many years you've been in adult ed or months, and then what your current role is with your agency that you're working with too. Because it's good to know if I have teachers, if I have support staff, if I have program managers, I can kind of tailor the discussion to around those folks. So if you could put that information in the chat, that's helpful for me. All right. So we're going to get started. The objectives for today is we're going to talk about the updated information regarding 11-12. We're going to talk about the new information that's out there for 13-14 and how long that is NRS approved for. We're going to review the best practices in delivering these tests and assessments. We're going to talk about the tools that have been produced by DRC, TABE Online, in order to be used for targeting instruction to help encourage student learning and increase level gains. And then this training today is also going to meet the Adult Basic Ed every 5 years test administration recertification. So let's think about why. Why do we deliver assessments in adult ed? So what's the purpose of them? We do it so that we can have or we can get some basic information about what students' strengths and weaknesses are and where their starting point is in specific subject areas. Assessments also help us to determine the best class placement for the student and the programming that's delivered in our programs. It will help teachers guide the instruction that they need to deliver. And then part of the funding that we receive, students have to have an NRS level or National Reporting System level, which are linked to their test results in SID to allow them to get both state and federal funding. But then those tests that are delivered during the enrollment testing helps us to know what additional testing will be needed for post-testing those students to see if they're gaining skills with the instruction that's being delivered. And then we're going to deliver post-testing after 40 hours of attendance has been documented in SID. And then those test results from the post-testing will help provide our teachers valuable info regarding whether or not the instruction that they were delivering is effective. So, and then the one of the biggest reasons is accountability for funding. We want to be able to provide information to our funders and saying, yes, we are serving a valuable purpose in our communities. So please continue to give us funding so that we can continue delivering it. So who can administer TABE tests here in Minnesota? Any staff in your program who has gone through an implementation training with a certified trainer, or staff who have completed the TABE certification found at tabetest.com under the certification process, and then any staff who has completed their 5 years recertification training, which is what today is. So any staff who has gotten it in any one of those 3 versions can be delivering TABE testing here in Minnesota. What do we know about TABE? Well, TABE's been around for quite a few years, but there's been a 1 and 2 version that was in the 60s, a 3 and 4 version in the 70s, a 5-6 version in the 80s, a 7-8 version in the 90s, and that's when I first heard about it because I was in adult ed in the mid 90s. 9 and 10 is when, like, the program that I currently work for, Metro North, started using TABE to help with high school equivalency test takers that are working with our program. Then we have TABE Online. Well, TABE Online's been around for a while too. The original launch was back in 2006, but then the new and improved version came out in 2017, and that's currently being delivered through DRC Insight. That's the platform that it's called. Then we had TABE 11 and 12 that got approved for NRS reporting in 2017, and it was originally approved for NRS reporting use through June of 2025. But this past May, that initial end date to use 11-12 for NRS reporting got extended through June of 2026. And then TABE 13-14 initially got approved for NRS reporting in June of 2024. And the NRS reporting is going to go through June of 2027. 3 years NRS approval is not super common. It's generally when tests are approved by the National Reporting System, which is where the federal funding comes from adult ed. It's usually a 7-year approval process, but for now, 1314 is approved through June of 2027. Um, TABE 13 and 14 did not get approved for NRS reporting in Minnesota ABE until March of 2025. The reason for that is because DRC did not release the online version of 1314 until January of 2025. So we didn't have access to testing. And then they did not release paper pencil tests to even be ordered until April of 2025. And that's when the order form was published by DRC. So even though it got approved in 2024, um, no one across the entire US had access to it until January of 2025. So if you have any additional questions about those past version of the tests or about the approval through 2027, you can contact Data Recognition for more information. So when the announcement came out, it came out in 2024. It was launched in 2025. These are just some more timelines, and I already had provided that on the last slide, but the order form was released in April 2025. One of the updates from 1112 to 1314 that there were no changes that were made to the CCR standards. DRC did not make any changes to the NRS level descriptors from TABE 1112 to TABE 1314. There are small changes to the objective blueprints that for the different tests, but one of the bigger improvements that they made from 1112 to 1314 is that paper testing for 1314 has one standard answer sheet for all test levels, all test subjects that's scannable, except for the scorees answer documents. So we've been told that the average overall reduction in testing time from 11 to 12 was reduced. And there's an FAQ document that there's a link in this slide from the deck too. So who should we be giving TABE 1314 tests to? Any learner who's enrolling in adult ed programming that's funded by WIOA can get a 1314 test. Clients who are interested in workforce center trainings, they can take the TABE test to determine their eligibility. Individuals who might be interested in earning their high school equivalency. Learners who might be enrolling into college courses. Metro North uses TABE testing for our Dev Ed math courses that we deliver at both Anoka Ramsey and Anoka Technical College. And then it can also be used for English language learners who score above a 251 on a CASA STEPS reading test. And it can be used for clients that are housed in corrections for education program level placement too. So TABE also has some other products that are out there, but please keep in mind that neither of these tests are approved for NRS reporting in Minnesota Adult Basic Ed. TABE has a writing test, and that the intention of that test is to be used with GED prep learners. It was released in February of 2021, but it's not NRS approved for reporting as of this month. And it's only available with computer-based testing. So if your agency has TABE online tests, that can be delivered, but just keep in mind it's not NRS reportable, but it can help with essay writing if that's who your target audience is. Then there's also a test called Class E. You may have heard of it. You might see that information in emails that are coming out for DRC. But again, that test has never been approved for NRS reporting in Minnesota Adult Basic Ed. And the intended target for those clients are it's used with English language learners. The original test was released in 2007, and that was the AB forms. That was approved through June 30th of 2025. But in 2024, the CD forms came out, and they were approved by the feds for NRS reporting, but again, not approved here in Minnesota. So what do we know about TABE assessments? Well, we know that they measure academic skills for life and work scenarios because they're geared around adults. They can be administered to a group, or you can do them on an individual basis. They have sample test items for test prep, and they're at no cost on the tabetest.com site. If you use paper booklets, it's cost effective, but if you use online tests, the more you buy, the more you save. They're relatively affordable if you buy them in volume, but it improves quality of assessment. They're affordable depending on how many you want to buy. In spring of 2022, though, there was an announcement that came out from DRC that if you buy TABE online tests, you need to make sure that you can use all of the tests that you purchase, because tests that are TABE online tests will expire a year after the date of purchase. So that's something that all programs who are ordering need to take into consideration. And here's the example that I tell folks. Think about your intake practices at your agency. If you're testing someone in reading and math when they are enrolling in high school equivalency programming, and then you are post-testing those individuals when they leave your programming, that one person could potentially use 4 tests annually. So just keep that in mind, putting together your numbers. This site is going to be where you're going to find most of this information too, but tabetest.com is your friend. There's all kinds of updates and info out there, and here's where you're going to find the sample practice items. You're going to find the objective structures. You're going to find blueprints, online tools training, accommodation guidelines, and then high school equivalency concordance. The concordance document shows likely predictors for how someone scores on a TABE reading or math test, and it'll show you what their predicted score would be if they took the GED test itself. But there's a link, I believe, further in the slide deck that you can look at that information too. So TABE, it's approved in 3 different subject areas. So you can do testing in reading or language or math, or you could test in all 3 content areas at your agency, if that was the practice. Can I get a show in the chat to find out what subject areas folks are testing in during enrollment in your agencies? Are you testing in reading and math during enrollment? Are you testing in just reading during enrollment? Are you testing in language and math during enrollment? I'm always curious to see that individual site practices of how that works, but each TABE test is designed around a certain content, so each test level has a grade range that's associated with it. The L level test is going to cover kindergarten through 1st grade. The E level test will cover the 2nd to 3rd grade range. The M level test covers from 4th to 6th grade range. The D level test covers from 7th to 8th. And the A level test covers from 9th till 12th. Oh, we have several people that test in all 3 areas. Better opportunity for level gains is what I say. I love hearing that, because that's what my recommendation always is, but it's a lot of testing for folks as they're enrolling, so I absolutely get it. So we all know TABE test is standardized. It always has been and always will be. So what does it mean to be a standardized test? It means that the test is always going to be administered and scored in the same way for every individual that's taking it at every test session. Doesn't matter if they're 19 or they're 60. Everybody needs to be allowed to use the maximum allowable time that they can take the test. Then there is a script that should be read to folks so that everybody has the same test experience. You can assist students with the demographics if you are doing paper pencil testing and they need assistance with the demographic section of the answer sheet. You can't review test questions before beginning the test session, but you can do the practice questions because you want folks to get familiar with how the tests or how that questions are going to show up. So yes, please use the practice questions to get them familiar with how to take a test. Students shouldn't be allowed to have access to their cell phones while they're taking a test, should not have access to any kind of translators or anything on like watches on their arm, or any dictionaries on their tables that they're taking the test, or on a computer that they're using. So breaks aren't allowed in the middle of a testing session. But just keep in mind, if you're delivering reading and math tests, there are two parts to reading and math. Yes, folks can take a break between parts 1 and part 2, but if they're taking the language test, that is one test. They're not allowed to have breaks. I say if somebody's water breaks and they're pregnant during the middle of a testing session, that's something else to consider, but they shouldn't be taking breaks before. So advise them to use the restroom before testing begins. And then please don't review correct answers with examinees, even though they want to know if they got a specific question wrong. There are diagnostics that can be printed off, the diagnostic profiles after someone is done taking the test, and you can access them and go over those results, or your instructors can go over those results with the students once testing is completed, but they don't need to know which specific question that they got wrong. But they can understand the content, and that's what the profile will show them if they have a weakness in a content area. So I talked about maximum allowable times. The link on the left side of this slide has a link to the maximum allowable times, but the times allowed for the testing for reading, there's 42, anywhere from 39 to 42 question items that are on each test based on the level, but there's 50 minutes allowed for part 1, and there's 50 minutes allowed for part 2 for the reading test. With the math test, there's 40 questions total across all levels. 45 minutes are allowed for the first part, and 15 minutes are allowed for the second part. With language, 33 questions total, 50 minutes allowed for the entire testing time. With the additional locator section on the bottom here, we've got 35 minutes that are allowed for the language test. 35 minutes that are allowed for the reading test, maximum allowable, 20 for the language, and then 10 minutes for each section of the math test. I'm going to look at the chat because I saw a question that came up. So 11-12 results were available right away. Now we use 13-14 results are 20 minutes. And thank you for posting that question. DRC has always said that it takes 15 to 20 minutes to be able to populate a individual profile report. If you want just raw scores, that information can be downloaded, and there's a report, an extract report that just will give you the raw data, so you'll know what the scaled score is, and you'll know the test level that someone took. And that's always been accessible quickly, but those profiles do tend to take a little bit longer to produce, if that helps at all. Okay. All right. So with 11-12, one of several years back, DRC provided us this slide that gave the test time averages, and this all got populated from computer-based testing data. And in the past, there were 50 minutes allowed for parts 1 and parts 2 for reading, but the average length of time that it was taking folks to take those tests was 75 to 80 minutes. With the language, 55 minutes is the maximum allowable, 35 to 40 was the average. And with the math, it was taking folks 40 to 45 minutes. DRC doesn't have enough data, that there's not enough programs using 13 and 14 yet to populate any new information, but this was an average. Something else that other programs have mentioned when I've delivered these trainings is that if folks are non-native speakers and they're using TABE, they are the ones that are tending to take the full time that is allowed for the maximum allowable time. So just keep that in mind, that even though this is the average, that you do need to give them the maximum allowable time. So can I get a show in the chat who's using paper, pencil, and who's using online? Because I'm always curious about that too, in thinking about planning an order. Or do you use both? Because if you're doing paper testing, the slide that I have up now is all of the different materials that you're going to need to order in order to have those supplies on hand to be able to test folks. Many of our corrections sites are doing all paper pencil testing yet with either TABE or with CASAS, so we don't deliver any online testing at the corrections locations. But every examiner who's delivering TABE is going to need a score guide. They're going to need the test directions and a test administration manual. They're going to need books. They're going to need a local scanning tool, which is something new, and that's a change from 11 to 12 because there's not an answer key available for 13, 14. And then they're going to need, every examinee is going to need locator booklets. They're going to need test book or booklets because most likely, if you're testing in multiple subject areas, they're not going to be testing in the same level in reading, math, and language. That's actually very common with all the testing that I've done over the years. It's very unlikely that folks are going to test in the same level for reading and language. But DRC has different options for answer sheets. They have a regular answer sheet, which is the one that's scannable. And you can use those for all the different test levels and all the different test subjects. But then they also have what's called score ease answer documents, and those have the answers embedded in them, and they're pref-rated. They're about 3 times the cost of a regular answer sheet. So I've had different agencies ask about, if they're delivering a locator and testing on the same day. My recommendation is to buy scories for your locators so that you know what test level to be administering to folks, and then using the regular answer documents for the paper pencil testing in the subject areas themselves. So other materials that you'll need for paper pencil is pencils, and they can have scratch paper for math, but not for anything else. There's different calculators that can be used, and in the locator, they can use a scientific calculator in part 2. But the level E test can't use calculator. Level M test, parts 1 and 2, they can have a protractor. Parts 2, they can have a basic calculator. And in level D, part 1, they can do a scientific calculator. And then in level A, parts 1 and parts 2, they can use the scientific calculator. So scanning and scoring. Again, this is different because there's not an answer key for 13, 14. If you're using DRC answer sheets, this is a requirement. You need to buy a scanner. And then any test results that are scanned are going to be uploaded to the DRC Insight platform, even if your agency doesn't have an existing online TABE test account. All of that information will be stored in there, and then diagnostic profiles can be extracted from that site, but you don't have to buy a test to do online testing. You can just use it for that service. So the header link in this slide is a scoring and best practice guidance. And this one's slightly different than what 11 and 12 was, but it gives an understanding of what the scores mean when someone scores. If someone doesn't get enough correct on a TABE test, there will not be a scaled score that is going to be populated either in an online test or in a paper pencil test, and that will be indicated in the score guide. So if you haven't already gotten the score guide for 13, I'd recommend ordering one. But if the student scored more than one level above the NRS, that's what those symbols mean. And if they don't get at least a certain amount correct, it will not produce a scaled score. So if you're using, and when you're using the locator and you're assigning the pretest in the subject area, the best practices of assigning the test level should be based on the number correct that they get in each separate subject. But if a student ever scores less than 6 on the locator, it may indicate that a level L should be administered. And that would be in reading, but if they score less than 7 on a math or a language test, then they likely would need to get a lower level test with the L level also. But just, keep in mind previous information on the examinee's performance to determine the right pretest that you need to be administering. So we're going to do a little test on your locator, because you know how locators work now. Sandra got 10 correct on her reading test with a locator. What test level should she be administered for her pretest? If you could put it in the chat, please. She needs to be taking an M level test, correct? So then we have Jamal, who got 6 correct on his math test, which is in the second column. What pretest level should he be administered? An E, correct. Nellie got 8 correct on her language. Which pretest should she take? Yes, she needs an M, correct. Richard got 12 on his reading test. What pretest should he be taking? D. Awesome, 4 for 4. Andrea got 11 correct on her language. Which pretest should she take in language? Another M. And then we have Molly, who got 15 right on her math. Wow. Does that ever happen? Oh, that's not super common. I was just, just to get a feel for the group. How many of you see A-level tests being taken in TABE in your agencies? Is it common? It is not common for our program at all. We see it with folks that are recent drops from high school, very, very, very recent drops. That's typical, but it's not common at all. So in the past, we used to hear about invalids. There's not scores that fall into invalid ranges with 13, 14 in any subject, but there are results that don't provide a scaled score. So if a number correct is too low, score guide will not provide a scaled score, and it'll either say NA or it will say OR on levels M, D, and A. With the E-level test, that is not the case because the scaled score will be provided regardless of how many they got incorrect. When a number correct is too high, the scaled score is given an asterisk sign in the NRS level, but that scaled score number is not going to increase. So whenever you have a scaled score on a pretest that falls into either the very low or the very high range, it's wise to retest. So, and the reason for that is a sample of the score guide in front of you. You can see that we are looking at a reading form M that is both a 13 and 14. And you can see that on a form 13, someone needs to get at least 7 correct, or at least 8 correct, in order for the scaled score or the score guide to provide a scaled score. So that would be a 442 if they are taking a form 13, and it would also be a 442 if they were taking form 14. I've had folks ask me about this when somebody doesn't get enough correct locally, and I've had folks statewide ask me about some good guidance. When folks can retest the same day, that's ideal, but that's not always the case based on the length of the test. If the difference in the questions on that specific test is 1, if someone got 7 correct on this reading level M, and they couldn't retest that same day, I'd recommend that the score of a 442 be recorded in SID if the person can't retest that day. So it does happen, but if it's more than 1 question difference, absolutely retest. Absolutely, because they don't understand the content in that test. It's just not a best practice. And I was taught this years ago when I first started doing this position, is anything in the mid range of a score of a scaled score that you're going to get on a test is going to be the most accurate indicator of where somebody's skill set is actually at. Low is possible, but anything mid-range is ideal. This next slide is showing.
Linda, excuse me, I just wanted to let you know this is your requested 10-minute check.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so then we have the high end of the range for the score guide. If you look, if someone is scoring more than 30 correct or 38 correct with their testing, you can see that that scaled score is not going to increase. And so ideally, again, if this is a pre-test, consider moving up to the next test level so that you're getting an accurate placement for folks, because they're never going to show growth in this test level, but they could potentially show it in the next test level. Okay. The slide here is going to show you everything that is built into the score ranges in SID for reading, for math, for language. The link at the header is going to have a nice big colored chart of all of these in a really pretty colored version of it. So this slide here, and there's a link up at the top too, but originally when 1112 was launched, we were told that programs wanted to have grade ranges so that they could explain test results to students more clearly. The initial version of the 1112 grade range test was not scientific basis. And so in the last year or so, DRC produced this new chart that gives grade range based on the scaled score guidance. So if you're interested in that and your program uses that, please refer to this chart for grade ranges of scaled score guides for reading, math, and for language. If you're interested in math resources, there is a Desmos calculator reference sheet link in here, as well as some online mathematic reference sheets that you can give to folks that are taking math testing so that they understand the resources that they can use when they're taking tests. Then the next assigned test chart, this is something new from 1112 to 1314, but it helps guide folks for the scaled scores that folks had received from a pre-test as to what test level they should be taking next. And this is designed for reading, for math, and for language. And again, the links are in here. TABE also has lots of really great resources that have blueprints that gives a breakdown of what is all on the test in the low, medium, high focus of what's on those tests. There's crosswalks that they've recently launched, and those are on the website, but the crosswalks show the TABE skill descriptor and the standard and the college and career readiness standard, and that's how those work. The online tools training is actually a really nice resource, and that can be used for folks who are not familiar and have never taken a TABE online test, and you want to get them familiar with what it will look like, what the sign-in process looks like, and so forth. And so you can use that online tools training in order to practice taking online tests with those folks that have never done online testing before. So TABE also has the on-demand reports for locators that'll give you a breakdown of how folks scored in different content areas on the locators. But the individual profile report that I was talking about earlier that's produced from the TABE Online portal, which is how you can help guide the instruction, because it'll show instructors non-proficiency, partial proficiency, or proficiency in any content area on the test subject, and then the test level that they're taking. And then this is the profile. It's the second page of it, but it'll show them the next areas for focus that they can help find curriculum for folks and what they need to be looking at in order to build their skills in those areas. So thinking about post-testing, everybody is responsible who works in Minnesota for post-testing their learners and their class and their site and their agency. But students have to have at least 40 hours of attendance recorded in SID in order to be able to record a post-test score. So folks ask about how do we know which post-test to give, but if the pre-test was in the low to mid-range, the test, use the opposite form of the same test level and the same test subject, but it's in the upper range of that level. Just check and see if they can get a level gain in that same level. And if there's no possibility that that scaled score is going to increase, then move up to the next test level for those folks. So these are the pricing for all the materials. If you're going to purchase TABE online, the more you buy, the more you save. But again, just keep in mind, if you're buying TABE online tests, you need to be able to use anything that you purchase within a year from a calendar date that they're purchased. So plan out your order before you place an order. There's a couple of things that I want to just stress with this part of it too. If you've never ordered TABE online tests before, your agency doesn't have an account, your minimum order is $1,500. That's about 375 tests. So if your program can't use 375 tests, I wouldn't order them. But if you're an existing TABE online agency, you can order $500 worth of tests, and that's about 125. So just talk to your program and see if there's an existing TABE online account. Wanted to stress this too because folks have asked about this, but since 2022, there's been leftover funds at the end of each year from supplemental service providers, and they need to be used up or they're lost. Since 2022, MDE sends out Google surveys to program managers every spring and then ask, hey, are you interested in TABE online or CASAS online tests from MDE for free? There's currently TABE online tests in MDE's state account, and they can be used for 11-12 tests or for 13 tests or 13-14 tests. But if you're interested in getting tests from that state agency account, contact Marty Olson at martha.olson@gmail.com. And if this was asked yesterday during TABE implementation training, if your program still has 11-12 tests and you want to move to 13-14 tests, you can convert those 11-12 tests to 13-14 tests by clicking that link in that Google form. It's a form that's linked to DRC, and they'll convert any remaining 11-12 tests to 13-14 tests for you. So what do we do if we find 7-8 tests or 9-10 tests, or if you have 11-12 tests that your program isn't using anymore that are paper pencil? You need to put them in confidential recycling, and they're not to be used for instructional purpose. So what do we need to know about level gains? Well, again, I'm going to state this. Every staff working in a state-funded program needs to know and understand what their role is in achieving level gains for their class, their site, their program, because all of us in Minnesota need to be working together to meet our gains. So things about level gains: establish consistent practices monthly, every other month. For new and returning students who are coming back into your program. And then test in more than one subject during enrollment. That's just a best practice. But then setting up regular routine post-testing practices at your site. So Metro North does in-person all-site testing every month at multiple sites, and then we do every other month for our evening programming because we don't accrue 40 hours in between them. So a lot of the data that's in this slide, Brad shared during the presentation this morning. So this information is all posted out on the MDE site. And then this last slide was a practice that we could use if we would have had time, but it's just kind of an interesting, how do I test these folks, and things to be thinking about. So I'm going to move to the next slide because I don't believe we have time to cover that. I think we're closing in on the last 2 minutes. Now that you're done with today's training, make sure you tell your data manager and SID to record your recertification and SID under your staff training. Make sure you signed in to the chat box today so that we know that you were here. If you need a CEU, it says take one in your hand, or we'll be sending out the CEUs likely after today's conference is done too. And then if you haven't already added TABE 13-14 to your SID test menu and you need to do that, there's a help desk under the SID under the SID help desk. So, or there's a help link under the SID help desk. So if you have any additional questions after today's session, please feel free to email me anytime, or like in a month or two or whatever. If a question comes up, yeah, please feel free to email me. That's what Marty and I are here for. I've provided all the information that I know as of today, and hopefully it was digestible and wasn't over anyone's head, or like sipping water from a fire hose is what I compare it to. So thanks for attending today's session. I hope the rest of your conference is that you have great sessions the rest of your conference, and I want to thank you for attending. So